unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony. Find the defendant
Yeah,
guilty.
here's the
This
sentencing.
verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, juror foreperson, juror number
Look at how he
19.
doesn't even react, dude.
Same caption, verdict count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to count 2.
This man's just been found guilty of 3 crimes.
An eminently dangerous act.
3 counts of murder. And this is his
Verdict agreed to
response.
This 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:45 p.m.
I take one of 2
Signed
things
by
away from
jury
this.
foreperson,
To
juror
me,
number 19.
it looks like he either
Same caption, verdict
A,
count 3. We, the
has
jury,
a
in the above
plan.
entitled matter as to
has a plan to fight this some way already in place, has discussed it, and is ready for this outcome. Or B, he just doesn't feel anything about it. And I find both of those equally hard to believe.
count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk. Find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April, 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury foreperson 019.
Now, after the verdict was read, Derek Chauvin was led away in handcuffs, appearing to show little reaction to what had happened. All right, let's get at some of this in the debrief now. We bring in Court TV legal correspondent Julia Janae. She is, as always, live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, Julia, let's start with what's next for Derek Chauvin. What will happen leading up to his sentencing?
Well, Michael, right now he is behind bars in a prison facility in Stillwater, Minnesota. He was taken into custody and then transferred there where he's going to await sentencing. He's in a single cell. It's called administrative segregation, where they keep him away from the general population. And in the meantime, for the next 8 weeks, the parties in this case, the state and
We'll
the
switch
defense
up
are
here,
going to
not too
file
long. I
briefs
just
with their
wanna
arguments
see a little
about
more
not only
about
the sentence
where
for
things are at here.
Chauvin, whether or not it should be a certain amount of time or a less amount of time is what the defense is going to be arguing. But also they'll be talking about the aggravating factors and filing those briefs. And ultimately, 8 weeks from now is when the judge is going to set that date for the sentencing hearing so that he can hear those arguments and ultimately make that decision.
All right, Julia, let's move on and talk about how this judge will go about deciding the sentence for Derek Chauvin. The state is citing several factors in order to get a stiffer sentence. Take us through those.
Right. The state filed this notice many months ago in this case because they told the court that they would be planning to seek what's called an upward departure from the sentencing guidelines, wanting to get a harsher sentence.
Yeah,
for
I did
Derek
see that. The
Chauvin.
state
And one of those
requested
factors is that they say that George Floyd was
higher
a
sentence.
particularly vulnerable victim. He was handcuffed at the time of this arrest.
They almost had him in the
He was
car.
treated with particular cruelty.
Yeah.
And that Chauvin abused his position of authority. They also say that there were 3 or more offenders who were involved, noting that this was done with the other officers and co-defendants in this case, and also that this criminal conduct was witnessed by children, those minor bystanders that we actually heard from at trial. So the judge is going to be the one who's going to make a decision on whether the state has proven that those aggravating factors exist. There was the opportunity for Derek Chauvin to allow the jury to decide whether or not those factors were successfully proven, but he waived that right at the end of the testimony and evidence in his case and told the judge he would be okay with the judge making that decision.
And now, Julia, the question I've been getting a lot from a lot of folks, what are the penalties that Chauvin could receive?
Well,
Minimum's
let's first
10
start with
years.
the statute here in Minnesota for each of these crimes. On the books, the maximum penalty for that top charge against Derek Chauvin, which is second-degree unintentional murder. Rather, let's start with the sentencing guidelines, since that's what we're seeing on the screen. In Minnesota, there are guidelines that these judges do adhere to in most cases, and it makes sure that people are treated the same way who are similarly situated. So
Yeah,
for
it
second-degree
only
and
does so
third-degree murder,
much.
it's the same recommended sentence. It's 12.5 years in prison is the average for this range that goes from 10 years to 15 years. Judges have the discretion to go low on that or high on that. And this is based on a person's criminal history, which Derek Chauvin does not have a criminal history. So he's on the low end of of what these guidelines recommend. Now, as far as how much time you would actually spend in prison, typically in Minnesota, if you're on good behavior, of that 12.5-year sentence, it would be about 8.3 years in prison, 4.2 years on parole. Now, for manslaughter, the sentencing is a bit different as far as the guidelines. 4 years in prison, 3.4 to 4.75 years, and the time that's actually in custody would be 2.6 years and 1.3 years out on supervised release on parole. So those are what this would be like if the judge just went based on the conviction and then looking at the sentencing guidelines. But in this case, like we talked about, those aggravating factors are in place. So the maximum under the statute is what could be a possibility if the judge finds that any of those aggravating factors, like George Floyd's vulnerability as a victim, if he finds that the state proved those. So this is a look at the maximum that the judge could go up to. Second-degree unintentional murder, 40 years is the max. For third-degree murder, 25 years, and for manslaughter, 10 years.
Yeah, so 10's the minimum.
Now, I've gotten a lot of questions about the maximum. Is he going to get the maximum 40 years?
I do not think he will get the maximum.
In this case, based on his background, even with the aggravating factors, that he's going to get the maximum in this case.
Even though he's had 18 complaints in his 18 years of service and has been reprimanded twice.
Legal experts here in Minnesota, they do say that judges want to make sure there's uniformity. And typically the max of the statutory sentencing is reserved for those who have a criminal background, who are repeat offenders and are engaged in
defined repeat offender.
But
he's
going to be
offended before.
Judge Peter Cahill on whether or not.
And I know I'm not talking to these people. I'm obviously talking to the people who are handling the sentencing, the judge, the
sentencing guidelines of 12.5
judicial system in general.
Average. But there are several factors that the state is arguing, so it's not just one, it's a total of 5, and all of that will be taken into consideration along with the mitigating factors that the defense will be arguing, saying that he deserves something much less.
All right, and Julia, what can you tell me about this Department of Justice probe into the Minneapolis Police Department and the death of George Floyd?
That's something that was announced today by the newly instated Attorney General of this country, Merrick Garland, who said that they're actually going to be opening a probe into the Minneapolis Police Department to look at their practices and how they handle things. We know the Department of Justice was already investigating this case since the time of George Floyd's death. They've been looking into the 4 officers involved, Derek Chauvin and his 3 co-defendants, and whether or not the civil rights of George Floyd were violated at the time of his arrest and death. Now we're seeing the expansion of that and a closer look by the federal government into Minneapolis Police Department as this entity that was responsible at the time for those 4 officers.
All right, Julia Janae, thank you so much for that report and for all your wonderful work during this trial. We'll let you go, but we'll be talking to you a little bit later this hour in the talkback. Right now, we do have to take a break. Now, when we come back, we have a lot more ahead for you in.
Cool. Cool. I am cautiously hopeful that Derek Chauvin will receive not obviously the maximum sentence, but an appropriate sentence. It's hard. I mean, it's so hard to say what an appropriate sentence is. And that's the thing. Justice is not revenge. Justice is not an eye for an eye. It's just punishment. So it's so hard to say what's appropriate. But I am cautiously optimistic that within the capabilities of the current judicial system and a quote-unquote appropriate sentencing will happen, and it will go on to pave the way to make prosecuting law enforcement officers who engage in this sort of behavior or in murders can be prosecuted easier and actually held accountable for their actions the same way the rest of us are. But we're probably going to switch gears here. Switch to some gaming and stuff for a little bit. I'm going to step away for a moment probably grab a granola bar, smoke a cigarette, and after that, I don't know. I'll figure out what we'll do. I'll figure out what we'll play. We'll play something. But yeah, be back in a bit.